no one was defending each other's arguments. People weren't very careful. They didn't really pay that much attention to links. Debates were much more messy. There was much less follow through. It was much more inconsistent, and I was so annoyed and aggravated by it. It's kind of exhausting as well. So to your question, how do you keep up with both? The answer is, well, I don't. If I die and people remember me as having written a bunch of good books, I'll be totally happy.
Just one more, then maybe Erasmus can follow up with a few. We've, I don't know, different people have come to interact with different stereotypes along the way. You talk about Shembuli sort of ranting basically about how he felt trapped in his Chinese identity, and people expecting a certain set of language, behavior, interactions from him by mere way of how he looks. And I think stereotypes have become a thing where almost everyone has their unique set of stereotypes that people interact with them. And I basically view stereotypes as preset expectations that people, without accessing who you truly are by mere version of how you look, or maybe assertions or interpretations about who you should be, create this set of expectations for you and expect you to totally fit in. Have you come across any stereotypes growing up in your professional space where it relates to how people see you and you've had to work through breaking those stereotypes? And how have you gone about them? Because I think it's a daily experience for lots of people, and sometimes breaking free of those stereotypes become a really, really difficult thing.
Yeah, it's a very interesting issue. It's very complicated because of the fact that I grew up
Yeah.
in Singapore and a mixed race.
Yeah.
So I tell you one thing, which this is more like a positive thing. Because I speak Chinese as my second language.
Okay.
Uh, wherever I go, whenever I start speaking Chinese, people are always very surprised, right? They don't expect me
Ah.
to do that.
Yeah.
Especially people from mainland China, always like very like pleased that, oh, you speak Chinese as well, and they're like, oh, look at this cute brown kid who speaks Chinese. Um, I've had to do things to fit in debating. Like, so this is not the way
Yeah.
I normally speak in Singapore, right? So I'm
Yeah.
speaking with like a Singaporean accent, definitely, but my
Okay.
accent is quite British when I'm talking like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If actually I'm in Singapore, I'm talking to my friends, I talk like that. Oh, a bit more like that, you know what I mean?
Okay.
Like more Singaporean, more faster.
Yeah.
If I'm in NS, I might speak like basilectal Singlish, which is like very incomprehensible, right? So I've had to code
Yeah.
switch. I had to learn to do this voice for debating when I was in Cambridge, right?
Oh. Wow.
Um, I don't view that as a terrible concession.
Yeah.
I view this more as a fact that look, I have a Singaporean accent. It can make certain things hard to understand if I speak at speed, and I think
Yeah.
um, and I think certain features of the English language do sound better in like a more standard accent compared to a Singaporean accent, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
some things that sound better in the Singaporean accent.
Yeah.
But that's like a big conversation for another time.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think maybe changing my accent is one of the biggest ways in which I do this. I've sort of had to conform actually to maybe not a stereotype, but to a cultural norm to fit in. Um,
Okay.
so now it's very natural. I would say many Singaporeans are able to do this, to switch between different modes of English.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes in debates when I was in university, you know, uh, people would say things about my team, Cambridge, because they would assume certain things about our socioeconomic status. They would say, "Well, of
Yeah.
course, the Cambridge team knows nothing about what it means to be poor or blah blah blah,
Yeah.
privilege and
Yeah.
everything, right?"
Yeah.
And actually, I have no objection to that because, frankly, anyone who goes to Cambridge deserves to be called out constantly for their privilege. Even though I don't actually come from a rich background, I totally understand why they would do it. And to be perfectly honest, the people who do that kind of stuff usually end up looking like the mean ones in a debate. It's very rare
Yeah.
that, as like
Yeah. True.
you look like the victim,
Yeah.
right?
The victim in that situation, actually. Yeah.
So, tell me a funny story. So, in the semi-finals of Euros, I think in 2011
Yeah.
or 2012, the first time I went for Euros, it was about whether we should have aggressive streaming educational streaming from a young age, right? And I
Okay.
remember I began my speech. I was opposing streaming by talking about how no one in my school got into the gifted stream, right? And the fact that no one from my school got into the gifted stream made everyone in my school start thinking about ourselves in a very specific way, even if we couldn't articulate it, right? We're being told in some big way that we did not belong to the top, that we were not the cream of the
Yeah.
crop. I remember
Yeah.
telling this, and I really believed it as I was telling it. After the debate, a couple of people came up to me and were like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, oh yeah, good speech." I mean, no one believed your story for a second, by the way. But good speech.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and genuinely, people just assumed because I was at Cambridge and because I like things like
Yeah.
classical music and chess that I must have come
Yeah.
from a privileged background all the way through.
Yeah.
So people just thought I was making this story up about coming from a neighborhood school in Singapore. It's kind of wild. I was like, oh, I thought it was a real personal moment. Damn. Um, these things have happened. I must say, in general, just because of who I am,
Yeah.
I've not allowed these things to really affect me that much. This is
Okay.
probably a kind of right one of the few genuinely maybe right wing or conservative beliefs I see some validity in, which is the notion
Yeah.
that if I really went through my own life with a fine tooth comb, I could find many instances where I might have been disadvantaged or treated badly because of the way I look, or the fact that I'm
Yeah.
asexual, or I speak with an accent, or whatever. Right? I'm sure I could find them, but I don't think that's a fruitful use of my time.
Yeah.
Right? I have a very finite hours of life on this in this world, and I want to spend it in a way which is quite positive and forward looking, and to
Yeah.
enjoy the things which are there to be enjoyed, and to forget about those things which aren't there to be enjoyed. Um,
Yeah.
and I think there is a risk. I think on some parts of the left that there's a bit too much self-victimization. That telling yourself you're a victim every single day, I think actually does something to you.
Yeah.
It can be slightly paralytic, and I think that is dangerous. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't push this argument too far, of course, right? Because it's very important that you fight against discrimination, stereotypes, wherever you can find it.
Yeah.
But it's just that I've never been able to relate to that personally. And these things have never really affected me. Like I remember, in the Euros final, the first time I was in the Euros
Yeah.
final, I'd never worn black tie before in my life. Never. I do not know how to tie a bow tie. I do not know how to wear a dinner jacket. I do not know how to fold French
Yeah.
button cufflinks. I do not know how to
Yeah.
do these things. Okay? So the
Yeah.
first time in my life I was in the Euros final, I suddenly had to do all this stuff. I felt super uncomfortable. I was incredibly
Yeah.
stressed. And I was sitting in my room thinking, how the fuck do I fold these double cuffs back? Like, what the fuck is going on? I'm about to go debate, and I'm getting stressed out about all this stuff. I'm hot, I'm sweaty, I'm miserable.
Yeah.
This sucks. Europeans need to find saner modes of dress, right? But
Yeah.
that's how it grades. But
Yeah.
I'll say I try not to dwell on this stuff and just to get on with it. And obviously, as I think I've become more relaxed about debating, I just do whatever I want to do. Like in the
Yeah. I
finals
mean,
of Hate, I was wearing sweatpants. You know?
yeah. I think there's a saying that has been surfacing recently that like when you look for discrimination, you find it.
Yeah.
And while I do not think it is maybe always true, I also think sometimes certain things could have multiple reasons why they are the way they are.
Mm,
And if you try looking beyond simply whether or not people are discriminating against you to try find are there genuine reasons why people behave this way, you might find probably genuine reasons why. It doesn't mean if you feel uncomfortable about it, you shouldn't communicate that uncomfortability to those
yeah.
people. It just also means that sometimes you shouldn't assume that it is all from a discriminatory point of view,
Yeah.
which
It
is
can make.
similar to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
No,
similar
I
to
agree
this
with you.
notion in debate about whether or not judges are always biased,
Yeah.
as opposed to sometimes judges can just get it wrong. And it has nothing to do with whether or not they are biased against you or they are biased in favor of someone.
Yeah. And also, I also, it would, if you end up thinking that every call is due to some kind of bias, it will just make debating such a miserable activity, right?
Yeah,
And it will make you not
yeah,
want to do it anymore, and it will make you feel like there's
yeah,
no point trying to be better.
yeah,
And and I totally understand this is obviously insanely unfair, right? Because it just means
mm,
that people in minorities or who look different or sound different just have to work harder than people who don't.
Yeah.
Um, but if you look at the history of how debating has gone, right, there's always been a couple of people who first broke through that barrier, right, just by bashing against it and just becoming insanely good, and then they
Yeah.
kind of open the floodgates for everyone who comes after, right?
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure the people who bashed through those barriers would not have bashed through those barriers if they were convinced that the entire debating world was like implacably arrayed against them, right? They
Yeah.
had somewhere deep down inside them a belief that sure, this is a in some ways a flawed system, but I am
Yeah.
good enough that I can overcome it,
Yeah.
right? And it's unfair that they need to tell themselves that, but in
True.
order to tell yourself that, you need to be in the right frame of mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'll jump on this for a second before I go ahead to ask my question. I think Andy and myself, the way we've had to internalize and confront this, um, especially because we saw ourselves as forerunners for not that there's not been African debaters, but entering into the new era, and especially when debate was online, we just thought there was a structural problem with us not being integrated within the community enough, and therefore it was legitimate that, for example, when people hear you, they are going to struggle to hear all of the words that you were saying.
Yeah.
That because it was through the internet, they were not going to be used to that. And I think it was partly because that was also our experience, even as we were debating with other people struggling to hear accent amongst a number of things. People were not used to your style of debating. The examples you used were a bit
Yeah.
localized. So we just sort of saw it that it is very easy because the mind has been gamed in a way that you're used to something constantly and you associate it with excellence. So anything which deviates from it would be seen as less appreciable. So there's a way you need to painstakingly educate the system. It's like training a
Yeah.
machine. Just keep on
Yeah,
giving it the information, keep on appearing, and keep on persisting. And that's the only way by which you can break the system and start tweaking people's fundamental view of this because it's a wrong view. And if it's wrong, then truth definitely prevails at the end of the day. Yeah.
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 And I think actually the trick to trying to educate the system, right? And when you tell me if this, and let me know if this accords with your own experiences. The trick to educating the system is really just to be out there constantly inside of it, right? Trying to
Yeah.
debate,
Mm,
organizing
mm,
things, being present, judging,
Yeah.
talking to people.
mm,
Um, and this isn't the same kind of transition as what you were mentioning, but something similar happened to me when I went from debating in world schools in Singapore to debating in BP in the UK.
Yeah.
Just the
yeah.
norms was so different. Like,
Yeah.
no one was defending each other's arguments. People weren't very careful. They didn't really pay that much attention to links. Debates were much more messy. There was much less follow through. It was much more inconsistent. And I was so annoyed and aggravated by it. It took a
Yeah.
very long time for me to even understand how this thing worked. But once you
Hmm.
understand how the machine works,
Yeah.
you can operate inside the machine with some credibility, right? And then you can
Mm,
start saying, okay, guys, maybe this is a problem, yeah, and this needs to be fixed. And when people look
Yeah.
at you and they say, oh yeah, this is someone who like knows the system and know how it works, they're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
some voice from the outer dark, right? And then you can actually start doing something. But the process of
Yeah.
adjustment is so painful and very emotionally draining, actually, because I
Very.
totally know what it's like. You sit in a debate, you're saying these things, and it's like no one is hearing you. Like, so
Yeah.
what the hell's going on? Like, I said these things, they clearly make sense. Like, and the other team
Yeah.
isn't even engaging. And then the judge is
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I just didn't buy your argument at the point at which it was made, so I don't
Yeah.
think you needed to engage. And you're just like, well, what the fuck are you talking about, right? Um, you know, I mean, I had that. I
yeah.
mean, admittedly, for a much briefer period, yeah. It
Yeah.
just feels awful, yeah. In fairness, though,
Yeah.
both of you have done quite a good job at it because you guys have, I'm pretty sure, quite well recognized in the international debating community at this point.
Yes,
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, because that was my impression as well. Like, I knew about you guys actually even before I went to Madrid.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's
nothing
interesting.
specific. I just had heard about it. I just knew that KNUST had
Yeah.
produced a number of like pretty good debaters, and they were like
Yeah.
very big in Pan Africans and had done very well. So I knew about KNUST. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And I think yeah, that's sort of what we seek to continue. And I think this platform is one of the mediums that we really want to use to continue to push the content, continue to try and engage the narrative, continue to try and be a part of the global community. So we're very very grateful
Yeah.
that you're on here and you're contributing to that too.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Cool.
I'm glad to help whatever way I can.
Cool. So, I mean, just to double down on some of these personal questions, I do know that you are into classical music, um,
Hmm.
uh, and you're quite huge there. Actually, I was quite surprised that I said I'll be very honest, and especially when you made a statement that you're actually more known for classical music than even with debating, and for
Yeah.
someone with that balance, you're still quite good at debating, I would say. Uh, I have two questions from here.
Hmm.
First of all, how were you able to keep up the quality of both activities while still pursuing it? I'll use myself as an example. I also do music and I do debating, and I find equal passion for both of them, but it always looks like there needs to be a trade-off. And I know this is the story for a lot of people who have dual interests and necessarily need to make this trade-off. The second question is, do you think the level of creativity which you are being afforded within the arts, or which necessarily you need to, I would say you are a creative person. Do you think it has had an influence on the way that you debate, and how have you been able to use that positively if it has?
Yeah.
Mm. So, oh, very, very interesting questions, actually. I like those. Uh, I've not been asked those ever before. So, first one, how do I keep up both? Well, you see, the thing is, the classical music thing really began as a by the way, almost by accident, right? So, I always played the piano from a reasonably young age. I always liked music. The thing about debating is that it doesn't require that much time apart from the weekends, right?
Yeah.
And when I was in university, I was a real slacker, right? I always tell people, I think in 4 years, I must have attended fewer than 5 lectures. I was always just swanning around doing something else. And the system in Cambridge allows you not to go for lectures, so it's not difficult to do that. So I
Yeah.
had a lot of free time, right? So I just
Yeah.
started genuine university. I just started making a couple of videos of music synchronized to the score. I put it on YouTube. Never intended for it to ever become this big. That would have been unthinkable. And then it just kind of happened. And actually, to be honest, you asked me how I have time for both. The answer is I barely have any time for my music channel. I think the last thing I put there was 4 months ago. Maybe every couple of months, one thing goes up. Um, it's very time consuming doing the music analysis, and trying to select the best possible recordings. It's a lot of time. It's pleasurable, but it's kind of exhausting as well. So to your question, how do you keep up with both? The answer is, well, I don't. Right? It's just kind of a pure coincidence that I have this number of subscribers. When I was in New York for HWS, I actually spent 5 days in the city beforehand, and I met, I think, 5 subscribers. We just hung out. We had a great time just talking about music. Many of them had studied music seriously, but are now working in non-music related professions. Great time, wonderful, wonderful stuff. Went for a concert and
Yeah.
everything. Um, so just like as with debating, the thing I've taken away most from the music actually is that it lets you meet very interesting people. Right? I've been to
Yeah.
tournaments before where people recognize me more, like debate tournaments in China, where people
Yeah.
are like, "Oh, you're the classical music guy," but they don't associate me with debating. It's very weird.
Wow.
I think later they might make a connection. It's like, oh, he actually did, you know, he won something. Passed.
That's probably the most surprising thing I've heard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was shocked.
When I,
Shocked. Um, so that's the answer to the first question. Second question, I don't think the music has like directly impacted the debating, except that I suppose it's made me quite in that I suppose both of them reflect a common creative desire. You're right, Erasmus. I am fundamentally a creative person, right? Like I do not want a speech to be like a condom, right? Like it's a one-off thing which is used in this context and then thrown away, right? Like I would like a
Yeah.
speech give to be something which people after the fact can look at it on its own and say, actually, there were nice things about it. Maybe the wording was good. Maybe
Yeah.
the ideas were interesting, right? It's like an object which stands on its own outside of it had needing to win a debate.
Yeah.
So I do view speeches as creative things, and I think I like music for the exact same reason. The only impact I would say music might have had on my debating, apart from the fact that I listen to a lot of music when I'm at a tournament, just to relax,
Yeah.
it's that classical music in particular places a lot of emphasis on large scale structure. What's interesting about classical music is that most modern music uses your typical verse, chorus, bridge, chorus structure, right? Song structure.
Yeah.
Classical music has a very big overarching structure for like an hour long symphony with details inside that, but it's the big structure which has to work. And that's basically how I view a speech. There has to be some big overarching structure, and inside of it, sure, lots of detail and interesting stuff going on, but for it to be satisfying, it must be good at a macro level. And I think that's probably actually been like an influence which my artistic tastes have had on the way I debate.
Yeah.
No, that's super interesting. I think you sort of locked into something that I've been thinking about quite recently, about frame. I think the last thing you said around how the structure of music influences how you debate. I think it's something I've been thinking about quite recently about how we think about the world. And I think I'm beginning to understand that we think about the world in frames. For example, well, I think I listened to a podcast quite recently where, or read a book, don't remember, where someone said the way in which we describe our emotions is sometimes by using other things because we never see our emotions. So
Yeah.
there's really no way. So we say there's a best of emotions to represent maybe like something like a river or a dam, and we use those frames to describe everything. So it means that the way in which you create those frames can become super important for the way in which you understand the world. So it's quite interesting that you talk about the structure of classical music to build your debating repertoire. And if it is effective in one frame, then it can also do very, very well for you in the other frame in which you used it. So I just thought that was interesting to point out.
Mm.
Cool.
Yeah.
Um, the next question I would like to ask you, and probably Andy has had it on his sheets for the last, but I wanted us to talk about your retirement. And because
Okay.
we
Yeah.
were there, then we just saw an article drop and said,
Yeah.
Ashish is retired at 31. And I must say, like, it was quite as surprising as the headline. But
Yeah.
I'm sure you have the question a lot. Why did you do it? What are you doing with your free time and everything? I just wanted to ask, is this something that you've always believed in? And what would you then say is your life's purpose? And I'm asking this because most people define their life's purpose per what they work. Childhood
Yeah.
aspiration as to they're working, retirement, what they've worked in the period where they work. So how what would you describe as your life's purpose, and how has this influenced your decision to retire from the workforce?
Yeah. It's a very good question. Um, First off, I completely agree with what you said. I've never seen work or having a family or any of these more conventional things as any way related to what I want to do in life. Those are definitely out. If I die and people will remember me as having written a bunch of good books, I'll be totally happy, right?
Yeah.
If I die and I've managed to climb a bunch of interesting mountains with a bunch of friends and seen some amazing, beautiful places in the world, I will also be happy. If I
Yeah.
die and people say he was a person who introduced me to many musical recordings I didn't know about, who influenced the way I think about music and why it's beautiful, who changed the way I listen to music and my understanding of music for the better, I'll also die happy,
Yeah.
right? I've listed out these three things in order in which I prioritize them.
Okay.
Writing is the big thing, then the outdoor stuff,
Yeah.
spending time in nature, hiking,
Yeah.
mountaineering, and then finally the music stuff. So
Yeah.
each of these three things individually would be enough to satisfy me, and I intend to pursue all three reasonably seriously. So those are
Okay.
what I would view as having. as me having led a good life.
Purpose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
No, that's super interesting. I think most of the time when you ask people this question, they're looking for a grand design, something grandiose that they can connect with. So it's quite refreshing to hear that yours is crisp and three things, and the way in which you describe it from the perspective of people who have witnessed you do that activity, and from people who have sort of experienced those things with you. I think it's really really beautiful.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I mean, I've never been very ambitious, to be honest. Um, I think very early on in the conversation, you mentioned something about how I'm competitive. I think that's true, but I'm much more like the reason why I do not want to lose a debate is because I think it feels really good to be really good at something, and it feels
Yeah.
awesome to be awesome at something, right?
Yeah.
Not so much because of the result. And I think people who know me well would say that that's always been there, even when I was very competitive. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. And Andy, do you want to ask a question now?
Yeah. For
Um,
me, my question about retirement was like, how did it feel feeling like the naysayer to the system, right? Because everyone's expectation or and this is a bit weird because I feel like that to some degree because currently I did biological science in school, I pursued the degree, and I'm teaching debate. And to a lot of people, it feels like, oh, he strayed away from the path. He's supposed to finish and be a lab technician or go on and do medicine and become a medical doctor or become a pharmacist. Why is he off doing something that in Ghana nobody even cares about? Right? So it
Yeah.
sounds a bit like you are off the system and people would have to take a lot of time to understand you. And sometimes family is not really appreciating of those commitments if you are straying away from traditionally what success would mean and what a meaningful life would mean for them. And I'm wondering whether you came across those resistances. How did they influence the decision? Did they even push you further towards them, or
Yeah.
did they make you take a little bit more time before
Yeah.
setting off the work tree? Yeah.
So I mean, the short answer is I didn't ask for permission. I just told them. The longer answer is no. I think you know because I've been so clear about what I want to do for so long. Um,
Yeah.
I tried to arrange things such that it was impossible for anyone to change my mind. And I was very conscious when I was telling people about my decision that uh, I also told them that my mind will not be changed on this. I mean, I didn't tell it
Okay.
in a mean way, but I said, no, my mind is made up. You will have views about this. I'm not interested in hearing them because it will be an unnecessary part of this process. You will not change my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's how I present. I told them, look, I'm going to be retiring. I'm not going to be working anymore in the conventional sense. I'm here and there. Um, and I said, and I'm not interested in hearing your views. Actually, I'm just going to do this. And I think they know me well enough that I'm not so irrational that I would do something like this unless I had some way to feed and clothe myself, support
Yeah.
them. I think they're pretty chill about it in the end. Right? I think they
Okay.
know that in the past I've done enough strange things in my life that I'll probably be fine this time around as well.
Yeah. 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 I
It's
mean,
important
because
not to care too much about what other people think. No one in the
yeah,
world really has your interests at heart. Not because they're mean, but just because they're
yeah,
living for you. Like,
yeah,
you are the
yeah,
only one
yeah,
experiencing your life from the inside.
yeah.
So
That is true.
you have to make the calls at the end of the day, and then you have to live with the consequences. But
Picking
yeah,
picking back off that, are you part of those who are proponents of UBI to say, well, we wish for a world where
yeah,
technology is so blown up, they work, make
yeah,
money, humans stay home, get paid a
yeah,
minimum or a decent amount that would be okay to live a meaningful life, and let them explore other things,
yeah,
sing, walk around, spend time with family, go to the beach, read books and write and do all the social things and take care of people. Are you the type of person who envisions that world and would prefer to live in that world than the current system where capitalism and everybody
yeah.
wants to work and strap? Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely 100%. Like we should have 100% unemployment. I mean, I think people should be allowed to work if they want to. You know, and I think
Yeah.
people will work because work is very satisfying. But I
Yeah.
don't think the kind of work people do right. I do genuinely believe that the work which people do right now is very alienating. It's not, people
Yeah.
don't see themselves in their work, even if they're paid well.
Yeah.
Most of the friends I
Yeah.
hang out with are very rich, very rich. Do they
Yeah.
fundamentally love their work? No.
No. Yeah.
I would
True.
say in some ways which they will not acknowledge, some of my right wing friends have actually become quite left wing. They just won't say it because they realize that work is actually not what it's made out to be, and that it's not true that the talented
Yeah.
people get promoted and the market's good at finding talent and generating value for society. People get paid a lot for
Yeah.
doing socially valueless jobs, and they know it.
True. That's
But
really,
they
really
won't say
true.
Marx was correct in those respects, right?
Yeah.
No. So I think if people want to work by, I don't know, becoming a carpenter or a car repairman, you know, or
Yeah.
a plumber, I think these are jobs which genuinely, in a world where your livelihood do not depend on, I think people would do these things and be proud of it because it's the work of your hands.
Yeah.
And these people,
Yeah.
totally deserve respect, right? But in general, I think no one should be forced to work because they need to live. I think that's insanely inhumane. I think we only regard it as being acceptable because we haven't reached a stage where we've got something better, right?
Yeah.
But just as we would, in the past, people have thought, well, obviously we need to enslave half of the world's population because slavery has been the way of every human, society since the dawn of time. We might not like
Yeah.
the fact that we have slaves, but it's just something we've got to do, right?
Yeah.
Or people would say that about monarchy. Yeah, I mean, sure, maybe the king isn't great, but he's still selected by God, and if it's not him, what you want us to choose, they'll be ridiculous, right? Every social system looks ridiculous, and obviously the best
Yeah.
currently, you know, in
Yeah.
hindsight, like, the best we've currently got until it changes, right? And I think it's the same
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
capitalism, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, what arrogance to even presume for a moment that we have reached a final evolved form of society? Obviously not. And it's weird that we have
This
spent so
is
much time getting rid of slave owners and getting rid of kings and
yeah.
lords
Yeah.
because we think there is something quite unsightly about having to bow and scrape and grovel. But we all
Yeah.
do this every day, or at least a large
Yeah.
number.
That's exactly what we are doing now.
They're just called
Yeah.
bosses or organizations,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is someone working in an Amazon warehouse really that much meaningfully better than a slave in a relatively exalted position in an American plantation in the 1800s? Probably not, you know? But hey, I guess Jeff Bezos needs to be worth hundreds of billions of
Just
dollars because he's a really good mover of parcels.
yeah.
You know?
Just the way you frame some of these things is really, really interesting. Because then I'm wondering, for instance, here you are saying we should get to a point where everybody's comfortably unemployed. And currently, one of the very statistics of measuring whether or not a state is prospering or not is the degree of unemployment in there, such that higher levels of
Yeah,
unemployment is
yeah,
the very measure of whether or not a state is performing badly,
exactly.
right? Which
I mean,
is such conflicting and ironic as
it
well.
is very strange that how many
Yeah,
people are currently under conditions of wage slavery? Well, a large number.
yeah,
Our society
yeah,
is doing well. I mean,
yeah,
I'm being a bit facetious because unemployment actually measures people who want to get a job but can't get a job. So, what
yeah,
I'm really saying is that we should have a society where the concept of employment itself is abolished and we just have voluntary work. Yeah, so we should have a UBI. Now,
yeah,
I accept capitalism is great, right? Even Marx
yeah,
acknowledged. Everyone forgets about Marx. Marx said many positive things about capitalism,
yeah,
right? It has
yeah,
massively increased humanity's productive capacity. It has allowed us not to
yeah,
do a lot of backbreaking toil and work. It is true that the
yeah,
workday is shorter and that the work week is
yeah,
shorter and the conditions are a lot safer. And we have these things
yeah,
called smartphones, which are amazing.
yeah,
I totally get all of that. All I'm saying is that this system is still insanely and brutally flawed, and it is crazy to
yeah.
think we'll not have something better after this at some point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree with you. And I mean, it makes it a lot more interesting to view what the future could possibly be,
Yeah,
right? Um,
yeah.
but there's one thing about whether or not people can just do voluntary work and be fulfilled. It's a question that people ask all the time. That one of the flaws of shifting away from a capitalist system is that human beings will become dumber.
Mm.
And then a question that probably pops up in my mind is: are we really better off having to rack our brains every day, or are we just better off? not maybe racking up our brains every day doing the simple things in life
Yeah.
and still finding happiness in it. And it's a question of whether or not people would be still finding meaning in existence as much as they do. Probably, like Erasmus said, a lot of people wrap around that meaning with work and what they do and feeling desired and feeling important in the space of a capitalist structure. Would people feel that same sense of need and desire and relevance outside of it when you just get up and do what you want, as opposed to you feel your boss needs you at work and someone somewhere needs you to do something for their work to function and all that? Yeah, I don't know if you think we would have the same level of meaning in both perspectives.
So, I mean, it's a very good question, and actually, I think this is like one of the big, like, fundamental issues, right? If you're a left wing person
Yeah,
and you call yourself a Marxist, um,
yeah,
let me put it this way: I don't think it's a coincidence that at the end of their lives, at their deathbeds, no one ever thinks I should have worked harder. I think there's a certain clarity of thought which comes at the end of the life when you look at the shape of it, which makes you realize that your prioritization was wrong. It's possible for your life to go terribly wrong while it feeling okay every
yeah,
step of the way. I
yeah,
take the opposing argument that there's no epistemic reason to privilege the later perspective over the earlier, but I actually think there is, right? I think the end of your life, when you've accumulated all of that experience, you are able
yeah,
to look back with a kind of objectivity and a large, taking the whole sweep of your experience in a way which is meaningful and which actually says
yeah,
something about what you want to do in life. I genuinely think if people didn't have to work, they would just find projects to entertain themselves with. And,
yeah,
and the problem, you see, the, the problem is that in a capitalist societies, the whole concept of a hobby or an interest has become degraded. Oh, a
yeah,
hobby is unimportant, interest is just a passing thing. But I think if we didn't have work, hobbies and interests would be things we would pour all of our time and energy into, you know?
that's true. Yeah,
And I think, maybe someone will say one day, I will want to write the great the great Ghanaian novel, and I'll dedicate 20 years of my life to doing it. Right? Maybe
yeah,
I want to become the first person to, I don't know, perform some incredible physical feat. Maybe I want to sail all
yeah,
the way from the mouth of the Amazon upstream all the way to its very start, and I'll dedicate 10 years of my life
yeah,
to doing that. Maybe I want to discover the cure for cancer because I want to help humanity.
yeah, yeah,
Right? These are lifelong projects which are difficult and backbreaking and require effort, and I think people would
yeah,
select many of these things. Or someone else might say, I want to become the best possible carpenter or plumber I could be. That's
yeah,
also a lifelong project, right? We
yeah,
tend not to respect these things because these people are not paid very much. But
yeah,
if someone is a great woodworker, I mean, why is that any less important than being a, I don't know, 20-time Olympic gold medalist? Like, both of these things you can pour equal effort into and can give you equal meaning, right?
yeah,
So I would
yeah,
say I just have enough faith in people's ability to find things which give them meaning in life.
yeah,
Because I think, in as much as nature abhors a vacuum, our psychology abhors pointlessness.
yeah,
Find ways to
yeah.
create meaning.
True,
Yeah.
true. Yeah, Erasmus, you can take it from here and then let's wrap it up.
Yeah, so just to wrap it up, I have no, I think the first question is, have you, and this, I'm just curious if you've ever come across, because you've been debating for quite a long time, you've come across any other African debaters, especially as you were debating in some of these opens in Europe and the World Tournaments. Do you remember any team from Africa? Because I know some of the teams from University of Cape Town used to
Hmm.
come around a lot. Do you remember any
Yeah.
of those teams interacted with any of them?
So I do remember the UCT teams which were debating at Walls at the same time I was. They were insanely funny. I cannot remember the name of that team. If you do remind me, I cannot remember who they
Uh,
were, but I think at least one
yes,
of them had their own. Um,
Who,
I
Erasmus?
know Yash than Yash. Um,
Oh,
and there was
yeah,
one
there
who
were.
used to always debate without using paper as well, which I thought was really nice because he had a very relaxed style,
wow.
very eye contact. Yeah. So I
Yeah,
do remember them. I
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure they beat Michael and I a bunch of times, and they were very very good. Yeah. I love debating against
yeah,
them.
Yeah.
yeah. Faithfulness has a story like that. I probably should check in with him on the details, but I think he
Yeah.
has memory of. one debate like that, which he always brings up. But anyway, I think the question I wanted to ask you was a hypothetical scenario, and that would be my last question. If
Yeah.
just reimagine that you are a kid, maybe coming from Singapore or even coming from Africa and entering into the world stage, what would be your roadmap? Can you give us a summary of your roadmap to success to get to the top pinnacle of debating? What would you do?
Yeah.
It's a very good question. It's a very, very interesting framing as well.
Yeah.
The first thing I would tell this kid is that uh, you need to develop either an interest in the world or a love of ideas,
Okay.
one or the other. Um, and that has to be your fundamental driving reason for doing this.
Yeah.
Because if you are in it purely for the glory, um, it's not going to bring you a lot of happiness, even if you get it. You'll be
Okay.
running on a treadmill, and you know how it works,
We'll
right?
stop.
You
Yeah.
win one thing, and then you just think, well, I've got to win the next. Um, and if you want to get really good, these things will sustain you through the difficult bits. That's the first thing I would say.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say is find speakers who do things which are unimaginable to you, which are inconceivably great in some way, and
Yeah.
then copy them. Do what they do,
Okay.
right? Kind of demystify them because actually copying someone both gives you lots of skills and helps you discover what it really is, which makes your style unique. But
Yeah.
copying people is such a great way to do it. That's the second thing I would say. The third thing I would say is something I've mentioned already, which is take the long view on what this activity is about.
Yeah.
Say you become world champion and world number one. Great. Why does that matter exactly? What are you going to do in your life with that fact?
Yeah.
And be very clear about what you're going to do about that because very few people in the world are going to care about it.
Yeah.
And if you are expecting that that will bring you some kind of broader social respect or admiration or professional success automatically, you are lying to yourself.
Yeah.
So I would suggest to this child that in the long term, what you'll take away are the human relationships. So try and be kind to people as you're doing this, and try to actually spend
Yeah.
meaningful time with the people you're trying to actually defeat in a debate.
Yeah.
And that will last you for the hopefully 60 years of the life you still have left, within which you will not be doing very much debating, and which you should still care a
Yeah.
lot. So those are probably the three things I would say.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. I think this not an answer that you get often. Usually
Yeah.
you get the niceties, work hard, things like that. But I think by taking a strong philosophical view about the journey that you want to take, it drives you more, and I think you recenter back to the reason why you always wanted to do this in the first place, which is to be happy. So I think
Yeah,
it's a very good answer. Yeah,
the
in my
reason why I
opinion.
wouldn't tell this child to work hard, because it's a very cruel thing to tell someone, right? If I tell them, oh yeah, you just got to work hard and be good and just put effort into it 100% every day. What if they do that and they don't
Yeah.
achieve what they want,
Yeah.
right?
True.
Like, working hard is an emergent property of your underlying motivations. Sort out
Yeah.
your underlying
Yeah,
motivations first, and then you will know whether the working hard is worth it, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
True. True.
that's
I mean, a final question from my end would be people tend to talk about the sacrifices they've made for debate. People have made varying sacrifices. I have my fair bunch. Erasmus has his. And sometimes these sacrifices may range from other things we love to people. Um, I remember I heard Gary Neville, who is a famous Manchester United player, talk about him cutting ties entirely with his childhood friends once he got accepted into the academy. And later on, reflecting and realizing probably that wasn't the best thing because then he lost meaningful interactions with people. And I'm thinking, what are some of the sacrifices you have had to make for debate, if you've had to make any at all? And when you look back on them, do you wish you didn't make them? Do you think they were worth it at the time? And you would still probably make them if you had the chance to.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I mean, before answering it directly, I'll first say I really relate to this sensation. In
Yeah,
German, they have a great word for it, which is like Torschluss panic, which means gate closing panic. The sense that
well,
as you're going through life, opportunities are being lost. Everything, whenever
yeah,
you choose one thing, you're shedding other things, right?
yeah,
And there's a Kierkegaard quote I quite like. It's not an exact quote. He never actually said this word for word, but it's a contraction of like a couple of lines. That life must
yeah.
be lived forwards but understood backwards. So
Okay.
you only realize what you've
Wow.
given up after you've given it up,
Yeah,
when you can't get it back anymore, right?
yeah,
But I really do think that part of what it means to be, alive and in the world right now and being a responsible person of agency means staring sacrifices in the eye and still doing what you think needs to be done,
yeah,
right? I think it's much worse to be a person who is unwilling to make any sacrifice because
yeah,
then your life just dissolves into a vague haze of nothingness, right? I mean, you're not doing anything.
yeah,
You got to choose at some point, and I think once you've chosen, you shouldn't think too much about how it could have
yeah,
gone. Because
yeah.
I can tell you, I guarantee you, every person who's at top of their field regrets, or at least in
Something.
multiple points, thinks about what else they could have done and how much
Yeah,
more they might have gotten if they did something else. For sure.
yeah,
It doesn't matter if they're Roger Federer or like a Nobel Prize winning physicist. Like everyone has had
yeah,
that thought, and it's unavoidable. So if it's unavoidable, try not to feel too sorry about yourself. What sacrifice did
yeah,
I have to make to be good at debating? Well, in a way, I'm lucky in that I was always very lazy and I never worked very hard at it. I never had like a case file or anything like that. I didn't go on a reading bit spree to prepare for worlds or anything like that. Um, the one thing I would say I definitely gave up was physical activity, exercise. Like I really, really
okay,
wish when I was in university I had taken advantage of all of the amazing opportunities to explore the outdoors because there's so many clubs in Cambridge which cater to that, right? I mean, actually, if you wanted to go
yeah,
skiing, they had ski trips every year. If you wanted to go hill walking, then a hill walking society. There was a
yeah,
badminton club, and I never actually did any of that stuff because I was so monomaniacally focused on debating. And now that I
yeah,
appreciate how fun and wonderful these things are, I really do think that's a big loss in university.
yeah,
You know, it's weird because I suppose debaters tend not to associate very strongly with their bodies, right? Like you're told as, or you're led to think as a debater, oh, my brain is really what I am, and
yeah,
all
true.
this stuff is just
It
stuff,
doesn't matter.
right? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's a meat sack. I've got to put stuff in the meat sack so the meat sack supports the this, that
yeah,
there, but otherwise it's fine. And I think I've come to understand that's not true. There actually is a lot of pleasure in having a physical body and using it to do things and making a physical body good at physical things, right?
yeah,
That very embodied sense of what it's like to be alive and have fun is a big part of what makes life enjoyable. But
yeah,
totally did not associate myself with any of this when I was debating. Which
yeah,
is why when I was in New York, I went on a hike. Which is why I just went up Kinabalu with Tom. Right?
yeah.
Uh, it's just very fun. Yeah.
I mean, that's really, really great, especially the initial part of the answer, which speaks to like you would have to make sacrifices anyway. And I think a lot of the time, the thing that traps us in the displeasure of the choices we've made or in feeling displeased with the choices we've made is to think, oh, the other one could have gone well. And I guarantee sometimes, maybe if we pick that one, we'll still be displeased with it anyway, thinking that this one would have gone great instead. And so
Yeah.
there is probably no objective way of analyzing since you never get to take both choices at the same time. But yeah, it's a really, really good way to view the world,
I think
like you said.
where I resonate with this the most is debaters thinking we are more this than this. I think
Yeah,
over the last couple of years, my mind has been changing about that, and I did notice it quite a lot. So I've been I think that's something I've also been quite conscious of quite recently to invest in physical activities, even invest in how you look and how you I think it's quite funny because I found it's also quite fleeting to invest in some of these things to want to go
yeah,
to the gym, want to dress to look good and things like that. But ever since I got in touch with it, I found out there's an immense amount of pleasure that comes from just being able to do stuff physically, like because you have the
Yeah.
strength to do so, or look in a way which doesn't come from any validation from the outside, but just
Yeah.
internally. Yes, I think
Yeah,
I
your
really
body can
relate
be
to
a
that.
project for you to work on, and the cool thing about your body is that you bring it wherever you go, and you get to
Yeah,
experience.
Yeah.
exactly.
That's pretty cool,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, true. Essentially, you can't go anywhere without it. So
Yeah,
it's always
but I
with
still
you.
feel happy in it, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, this has really been a massively enjoyable conversation.
I enjoyed it
I think
really.
like we could go on and on and on and on, but
Yeah,
that's the the fun thing about podcasts is they suck you in so much. The non-fun thing about it is at some point you have to let go,
yeah,
and and this is the point at which we wrap things up. It's really been fun and fascinating listening to you talk, especially the way in which sometimes I probably hold similar views to you, but the way you frame them so compelling. And sometimes I wonder if I heard you say this thing without having an underlying conversation, I'd probably say I don't believe in this. But then listening to the backdrop and then framing it that way, I think I actually believe in this as well, which is really interesting. And it's been a really fun conversation
yeah. I've
with
enjoyed
you.
it a
Perhaps
lot as
yes,
well.
perhaps you have last words for us.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, either of you gonna be at Panama?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
both would be.
Okay, great.
He
I'll see you around
Erasmus is
then.
DCA for Panama, and
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
you are. Yes, correct. Yeah, I saw the announcement. Yeah,
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 yeah.
and I myself am working on a partnership too. He betrayed me actually because now I don't have a partner, so now I have to go soul searching
yeah,
for a temporary soulmate so I
yeah.
could come to Panama with. Yeah, but
Okay.
hopefully I'll be there.
Well, in which case, my last words will be, well, I hope to bump into you guys at Panama, and let's hang out, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely, definitely. Hopefully, when we
Really so.
meet, we'll probably have an in-person discussion and then
Yeah,
have an in-person episode as well. Yeah. Thanks so much. It's been really nice having you, and
Pleasure.
hopefully everyone enjoys this. I hope to see lots of comments, especially on your wild takes as well,
hmm
and we'll definitely piggy them back to you as to what people are saying about this episode.
yeah.
So thanks so much for coming on.
All right, thanks.